Hi, I'm Anupama Chopra. I'm a writer, film critic, and editor of Film Companion. This film, Listen to Me Marlon, moved me in deep and unexpected ways, and I'm sure it did the same for you.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Marlon, let your mind drift back, way back in time, to a time when you were very young. It is like a wonderful, soft dream.
Since I don't do anything else well, I might as well put all my energies into being as good an actor as I can.
You bring part of yourself to every character, but some parts are closer to us than others.
So it gives me great pleasure to invite on stage the director, Stevan Riley. This is Steven's fifth documentary. He's also before this made Fire in Babylon, which is about the West Indian cricket team. And I have to tell you, Steven, I have no interest in cricket, but I could not stop watching that film. It was such a passionate story of how they became champions of the world. He's also made a film called Blue Blood about this 100-year-old boxing match between Oxford and Cambridge. Steven, talk us a little bit through the process of making this film. You had over 300 hours of audio recordings, dictated character sketches, phone conversations, and even a set of tapes called self-hypnosis. How did you decide what to keep and what to throw away?
Well, the self-hypnosis tape, or one of the self-hypnosis tapes, there ended up being a bunch of them in the end, was one of the first tapes that I listened to. I was just formulating how I was going to approach the film. There was potential to go the Talking Heads route, and I was still researching that, in fact, and I read books that I could get hold of, went to the States to meet up with members of Marlon's family, his friends, work colleagues, that kind of thing. There was about, I'd say about 40 odd people that I got in touch with, spoke with them, and it was a very interesting process because as informative as those books were and those interviews were, I was still left a bit unsure about who the real character of Brando was, because I would get slightly different versions of him from different people, and some people were very much in favour of him. There would be some things which were quite negative in terms of their assessment of his personality. So I didn't really have a proper bearing on who Brando was as a character. The estate had boxes, loads of boxes of Marlon's just personal materials and effects that had been in storage for 10 years since Marlon passed away, and those boxes were just being unpacked, and a bunch of this stuff was coming out.
So there was no cataloguing. You didn't know what was in there.
So they were just cataloguing it at the time, and that's one of the first things you inquire is what do we have access to? Is there anything special that's coming out? And there happened to be a lot, but the bigger worry was then about actually, are we going to get it out of the boxes in time? Because the production period for the film was scheduled to be a year or just over a year, and it was really quite uncertain whether everything would come out of the boxes in time to actually look at it. But thankfully, the people at the estate who I was dealing with were just as eager, to help me and just get everything out and to hand that stuff over. I thought, well, can you imagine how it would clear the confusion that I was going through if Brando was the person delivering his own story, and he was the person guiding us through his life and trying to solve the big question that I found everyone was asking, and I was asking as well, is that who was the real Marlon Brando?
So you talked about the talking heads approach. Did you ever think that, did you consider the traditional documentary approach to this, the talking heads and the clips and, that kind of thing? Was that a serious consideration?
The first outline was that Marlon would be doing a psychoanalysis of himself, which is a very ambitious, storyline to propose, but and I wasn't sure that was possible to deliver on at all. So partly when I went out to the States to meet the family and to speak with people, I didn't film those interviews, I just took notes, but at the back of my mind there was always a question, well look, if that other route doesn't work out, then
this
who
is the
are we going to speak
backup
to?
plan.
Yeah, who are we going to speak to? And actually there was lots of very interesting people I spoke to, but I thought, his PAs were particularly interesting. These were women who spent a lot of time with him. Some of them who had relationships with him. They worked with him. They spent, and they were, kind of very qualified to just explain who he was. And so if this route didn't work out, then I think I might have gone with the PAs.
Everybody's got something they're hiding.
In the theater, the actor is the boss. It's against the nature of human life to withdraw.
When what you are is unwanted, and you look for an identity that will be acceptable. A good con man can fool anybody. The first person that you fool was yourself. You lie for peace, you lie for tranquility, you lie for love.
Did you have anyone watch this and say, no, this isn't him at all?
No, thankfully, and in fact, it was a bit nerve-wracking towards the very end because the estate, the trust was built at the very outset. I think they liked the fact when they handed over all the tapes in the archive that Marlon was going to be the person who would be delivering the story. So, if it was all in Marlon's own words, then let's see how they were confident to let that to take its course. But when we finally screened it to the estate and the family, there were only positive reactions, actually, and all it is kids who I spoke to in the run-up. So there was Miko and Rebecca especially. They've been very supportive of the film, and someone in the estate said it was the film that Marlon would have wanted. But there's but I couldn't guarantee that at all. Whether he would have liked, to have had all of his private recordings laid bare in the way that they were, but it was just it was a real personal commitment to make sure that the research was done so thoroughly that Marlon would see a decent reflection of himself.
Was there anything that felt so personal that you couldn't put it in?
Not especially. There was maybe more stuff when he was with women, and he would put the recorder on because he thought that would be fun. And
Did these people know they were being taped?
I think so. I mean, you hear him chatting with that Japanese lady, and she's well aware. He's got the recorder out there, and he's role playing, pretending they're doing a radio show. So that was known, but beyond that, I mean, there was nothing really off limits because Marlon went to those places himself. Anything that was really difficult that may have been a concern for the family or the estate. It was just great that Marlon takes us to the places of, say, addiction, his own addiction, the addiction of his parents. He describes the tragic events that took place in his household with the shooting of his daughter's boyfriend. So. No, there was nothing off limits in that regard.
And was there anything you really wanted to put in there but just couldn't find the right fit or the place for it?
There was just one thing, actually. There was one love affair that he had with a lady who he met on the set of the film Candy, and there was. I mean, when I would speak to people, I would always ask, who was Marlon's true love. And this name just kept popping up of this lady called Jill Banner, and so I investigated her story a bit more, and Marlon was, as he describes, he was very jealous, and oddly enough, it was kind of overlapping with the time of Last Tango, that he was going through a very tumultuous part of his relationship with this lady Jill, and he pushed her away to the point where she left him completely. But then she returned to Los Angeles after 5 years, and he saw her again and said he was just so love struck and was so pleased to see her. And they started their relationship again, but she died in a car accident within 2 weeks. So any promise that she might have been the person who at the right stage of his life, because he wrote her a letter asking for her forgiveness for how he treated her, and said that he was, in the course of writing that letter, he was also forgiving his mother for her negligence and absence when he was a kid. I felt that he was mature enough maybe at that point to make a proper go of a relationship, but she passed away.
Do you think the film has special resonance today? Because I think the relationship with celebrity has become even more amplified, perhaps toxic. It's just on social media, it's sort of taken it to another level. So can we sort of draw many, many other conclusions from looking at this?
I think so. I mean, Brando was the prototype for celebrity culture. There arguably hadn't been as big a star in cinema who defined the 20th century as Brando and defined his profession. Set the course of the latter half of the 20th century, where celebrities would have their lives intruded upon. Marlon was somebody who, you heard from the beginning, goes all his life he wanted to be free, and and fame deprived him of that. He couldn't be out in the world, he couldn't observe in the way he liked to, and so it's a tragedy in a way. And I think it's something we need to analyse. But how we regard fame. Be careful what you wish for. How we treat our celebrities. It's I think an interesting fable for our modern times and looking at his life.
When you say, when we have to think, because somewhere I felt like it indicts us all. We're all part of this machine that somehow didn't respond to him in the way that perhaps we should have. We're all part of the public that's those prying eyes that he just wants to get away from.
Well, even when I came to the film, all I had to go on were the myths of Marlon Brando. Everything I read in the tabloids. He wasn't just painted as eccentric, and he was mildly eccentric, Marlon. He was spontaneous in a very creative way, but he was painted as a real crazy and someone who was just so at the mercy of his lust and other things, and just an oddity, a bit of a freak show.
Control, because they talk about the weight gain and the and even in the film at one point he starts to talk about acting just like another job. By the time when he's doing Superman, and so someone who's just difficult, not in a good way.
And that's it. And that version of him was the one that kind of just managed to dominate the headlines. Whereas there was no room for a more sensitive portrayal of him, or even to really ask the questions as to why he might be like that, or even any awareness that he was asking himself those same questions. In the end, it just becomes a bit of a bullying scenario where we support the media in how they attack stars for our titillation, really.
In a very famous interview he did with Truman Capote in The New Yorker in 1957, he talked about wanting to give it all up, and he said that. What's the point of it if it doesn't evolve into anything? You're a success, you're welcome everywhere, but it doesn't lead anywhere. He said, too much success can ruin you as surely as too much failure. Do you think too much success ruined him?
Yeah, he really, he just didn't want that success at all. That was something he very much rejected. I don't think he fully expected. Who could? He didn't. Wasn't something he planned on. There was a brief moment, and you hear it in the film. And when I spoke to Ellen Adler, who's Stella Adler's daughter, who Marlon had an affair with, and I asked her. I said, did Marlon, did he enjoy that first flash of success with Streetcar when it was a Broadway hit? And she said, yeah, for a moment. He said, this was what he'd been waiting for, and this was perfect. But that quickly dissolved. And he really didn't want anything to do with it, because it did force him to hide away and be he was hunted. It was nothing short of that, and and there was huge money to get a photo of Brando. The more he went away, the worse it got. And in the end, he just was a shadow of himself. It's amazing how much he actually kept his mind intact. And but that's what he would do. I think in his later years, he would stay at home. He would take pleasure in books. He would spend a lot of time in his interior space, which is what the film represents, exploring himself and exploring the ideas. And he said that the greatest adventures that he could ever have would be in the mind, because that's all he had really, because he couldn't go out into the world anymore.
But I think the tragedy really is that the fame made him lose interest, in a sense, in his own talent, in the acting. Because in the beginning, he talks about if you can make them stop eating the popcorn, and when it's good, it's really good, and you feel it, and you can hear the passion in his voice. And then as you go on, it comes to, well, acting became another job. For me, that was just so unimaginably tragic.
Well, yeah, and that first stuff, you could hear that was the idealist, that was the artist in him. And he really was obsessed. Much in the same way he was a philosophical man. He wanted to find the deeper meanings in life and find the purpose of our existence, full stop. And that's what motivated him in his acting too. He wanted to discover truth in acting and represent truth as a way to educate himself and the audience. But by stages, he did get disillusioned, and he did want to deflect attention away from himself. He didn't want to, even imply that he loved his art, and for many different reasons. I think it was partly the inferiority instilled by his dad. That acting wasn't a man's profession, and that was nothing to be proud of. But also there were other factors that put him off his craft, including the fame and the attention from people, which deeply troubled him, and also Hollywood as well. He felt that he was treated badly or made a scapegoat for many movies. I mean, it could be difficult. If you weren't smart enough as a director, and you lost his respect, then you were in for trouble. But by and large, if he was with a good director, he was very obedient, and he wanted to do the best, which is why someone like Bertolucci could lead him right down the path, because he was an artist, and he did have those ideals, and he wanted to bring meaning or messages to his films. And when those messages weren't possible, maybe by a change of tack from the studio, or where he wasn't consulted, or for whatever reason, then he'd get fed up, and then he'd do his best to rubbish his trade and his craft. But I think he'd flip a lot. He'd go from being the optimist to the cynic, and that could be in the course of one day. He was just that sort of guy, but ultimately optimistic.
Is that what happened with him and Coppola on Apocalypse Now? He wasn't consulted, or what went down there?
Well, it's hard to say on that one, because I just took for granted that Marlon was difficult. I'd seen Hearts of Darkness, and I loved that documentary, and then there was the Life magazine article where Coppola came out and criticised Brando in print. But the more with all this stuff at my disposal, and I had the letters between Marlon and Francis, there was loads of documentation that was there too. I felt that Brando had a right to reply on that, because Coppola had always said that he could, that the film was in dire straits. They didn't have a script for Act 3, and he said he was faced with a choice, and he says this in Hearts of Darkness, between either halting production and doing rewrites, or do improvisations with the best actor on the planet. And so if things went over by a couple of weeks, and Brando, he was channeling all that stuff. I mean, those were all the things which he was interested in, about the nature of good and evil, and exploring the character of Kurtz, and making Kurtz intelligent, which was different to the guy in the script. I'll hasten to add. It just made me think, well, actually Brando should have a voice there. And when he's angry with Francis, he really liked Francis, and I think ultimately they did adore each other quietly. But in that instance, he did flare up, and he felt that he was being vilified, which is his worst fear, going right the way back to the days of Meet You on the Bounty, where he thought he was made the scapegoat too.
This film has got rave reviews, Steven. David Edelstein wrote in New York Magazine that it is the greatest, most searching documentary of an actor ever put on film. Village Voice described it as something of a masterpiece. So how are you going to ensure that too much success doesn't ruin you?
Do you know, I'm quite good at managing that within myself. Actually, it's probably quite, especially doing films like this too. I'm even more aware of pitfalls like that. But yeah, but it's still kind of it's still low budget documentary. It's not.
So it's not quite the same thing
It's
at
not
all?
Lord of the Rings. I'm not kind of. I'm not doing anything too big just
You're not
yet.
going to be ruined anytime soon.
No. I look forward to that. I look forward to being really arrogant at some point in the future. Yeah, that's something to look forward to.
Steven, thank you so much, and congratulations on such a wonderful movie. Thank you.
I feel as though I'm coming closer to what it means to be human.
You are the memories. Hit them, knock them over. With an attitude, with a word, with a look.
Everybody feels like they're a failure. Everybody feels they could have been a contender.
I love hearing from you, so please keep talking to me. Hit this subscribe button and keep commenting.